Father Abram 300,000 more, from Mississippi's winding streams and from New England's shore. We leaves our plows and workshops and our wives and children dear, with bit our prayer for utterance with but a silent tear, and we dare not look behind us but steadfastly before.
Hey everybody, welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and we are reading State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration by James Risen. Remember, if you like what you hear, hit that like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when I make a new video. Let's dig in. In late March 2002, the National Security Agency obtained communications intercepts that indicated that Abu Zubaydah, a key lieutenant of Osama bin Laden, was hiding in Faisalabad, Pakistan, southwest of Lahore. Like most of Al-Qaeda's senior leadership, Zubaydah had fled Afghanistan as the Taliban government fell. He was now being harbored by local Islamic extremists. Some top Al-Qaeda leaders had made their way west to Iran after the ouster of the Taliban, but a large number, including Osama bin Laden, went south to Pakistan. Bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, his top deputy, found safe haven in the remote mountainous tribal region along the Pakistani side of the Afghan-Pakistan border. But others, including Zubaydah, moved into Pakistan's urban areas where they became easier targets for American intelligence. The information on Zubaydah's location was precise enough to trigger late-night raids on several houses of suspected extremists in Faisalabad, conducted jointly by the CIA, FBI, and Pakistani security forces. The Pakistanis went into each house first, searching not just for Zubaydah, but for other operatives who might be hiding with him. In one house, a shootout erupted as the suspects made a run for it. One man was shot several times, including once in the groin, as he fled across the roof. The Pakistanis handcuffed the wounded suspect and threw him into the back of a pickup truck along with several other captured militants. I cannot stop thinking about getting shot in the groin. What a terrible thing to have happen. It was only when a senior FBI agent shined a light into the truck bed and recognized the face of the trussed and wounded man that anyone realized that Abu Zubaydah, the primary object of the raid, was bleeding to death. The terrorist was rushed to a Pakistani hospital. After his medical condition stabilized, he was secretly flown to Thailand and into CIA custody. Excuse me. The Thai government, which had long battled Muslim separatists in its southern provinces, and also had a history of cooperation with the U.S. military dating back to Vietnam, was willing to be the first country to provide a secret location for the CIA to imprison and interrogate important Al-Qaeda prisoners. Abu Zubaydah was the first high-ranking Al-Qaeda leader to fall into American hands after the September 11th attacks, and his capture was greeted with elation at the CIA and the White House. President Bush had famously called for Osama bin Laden's capture dead or alive, and kept a CIA-generated list of top Al-Qaeda leaders so he could cross them off one by one as they were killed or captured. As it became increasingly clear that bin Laden had slipped through Bush's fingers, and that only one other major Al-Qaeda figure, Mohammed Atef, the terrorist network's chief of operations, had been killed in Afghanistan in November 2001, Bush was painfully aware that most of al-Qaeda's leadership still remained at large. Zubaydah's capture was a concrete and very welcome sign of progress in the Bush administration's new global war on terrorism. There is a dispute about what happened next, largely because of the highly secretive nature of the Bush administration. According to a well-placed source with a proven track record of providing extremely reliable information to the author, George Tenet soon learned that George Bush was taking a very personal interest in the Zubaydah case. Just days after Zubaydah's arrest, Tenet went to the White House to provide the president with his daily intelligence briefing and to discuss with him details of the Zubaydah case. According to the source, Bush asked Tenet what information the CIA was getting out of Zubaydah. Tenet responded that they weren't getting anything out yet because Abu Zubaydah had been so badly wounded that he was heavily medicated. He was so groggy from pain, he was too groggy from painkillers to talk coherently. Bush turned to Tenet and asked, "Well, who authorized putting him on pain medication?" It is possible that this was just one more piece of jocular banter between two plain-speaking men, according to the source who recounted this incident. Bush's phrasing was ambiguous. But it is also possible that the comment meant something more. Was the President of the United States implicitly encouraging the Director of Central Intelligence to order the harsh treatment of a prisoner? If so, this episode offers the most direct link yet between Bush and the harsh treatment of prisoners by both the CIA and the U.S. military. If Bush made the comment in order to push the CIA to get tough with Abu Zubaydah, he was doing so indirectly, without the paper trail that would have come from a written presidential authorization. The occurrence of the exchange between Bush and Tenet has been challenged by some former senior Tenet lieutenants. Tenet lieutenants? Sounds funny. Well, they say they can't deny that it ever happened. They say they have never heard of the incident and don't believe the story to be true. Several former senior CIA officials also stressed that Abu Zubaydah was given first-rate medical care that saved his life after he was discovered in the back of the Pakistani truck. There have been reports that pain medication was withheld from Abu Zubaydah after his medical condition stabilized. In his 2003 book, Why America Slept, author Gerald Posner reported that after Zubaydah had been stabilized, he was administered a quick-acting narcotic infusion that would alternately be turned on to alleviate pain and turned off to make him feel pain. Well, let that sink in. Despite the dispute over the Tenet-Bush conversation concerning Abu Zubaydah and his pain medication, several current and former CIA officials say that after the September 11 attacks, the president made it clear to agency officials in many ways that it was time for the gloves to come off. The reported Bush comment about pain medication from Abu Zubaydah fits into that broader get tough message that the president and the White House were sending to the CIA in the months after 9/11. 2 years after Abu Zubaydah's capture, the Iraqi prisoner abuse scandal erupted, triggered by photographs of degrading and pornographic treatment of detainees at Abu Ghraib prison, and expanded with further disclosures of abuse by the U.S. military and the CIA. No one has ever been able to link George W. Bush directly to the chain of offense that led to the prisoner abuse. The White House steadfastly maintained that President Bush was horrified by the images of torture and that he had never personally approved the harsh interrogation methods employed against Iraqis, Afghans, and other prisoners. According to the White House's version of events, Bush remained far above the dark side of the war on terror. In the many news stories about the abuse scandal, including those that described administration deliberations about the legal basis for harsh interrogation tactics, Bush was an absent figure. It was as if the interrogation policies were developed in a presidential vacuum. When legal opinions written by Justice Department lawyers approving harsh tactics were made public, the reaction of the White House was to downplay their significance and argue that the president had always insisted that prisoners be treated humanely. The Abu Ghraib scandal eventually ebbed, in part because of the lack of proof that the president had ordered the mistreatment of prisoners. In June 2004, just after the Abu Ghraib photos first emerged, Bush insisted that he would never order torture. "Let me make very clear the position of my government in our country," he told reporters. "We do not condone torture. I have never ordered torture. I will never order torture. The values of this country are such that torture is not a part of our soul and our being." He added that the United States will continue to take seriously the need to question terrorists who have information that can save lives. But we will not compromise the rule of law or the values and principles that make us strong. Torture is wrong, no matter where it occurs, and the United States will continue to lead the fight to eliminate it everywhere. There is evidence that senior administration officials, apparently including Vice President Dick Cheney, made certain to protect the president from personal involvement in the internal debates on the handling of prisoners. The CIA's Office of Inspector General, which has been investigating evidence of the agency's involvement in prisoner abuse, has found that there was never any written form of presidential authorization covering the CIA's interrogation tactics used on detainees in its custody, according to a CIA official familiar with the IG investigation. The president was never officially briefed on the tactics being used, the IG found. George Tenet gave briefings on the CIA's interrogation tactics to Vice President Cheney and a very small group of other top officials, including National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, Attorney General John Ashcroft, and then White House counsel Alberto Gonzales, according to a CIA official. Normally, such high stakes and very secret CIA activities would be carefully vetted by the White House and legally authorized in writing by the president under what are known as presidential findings. Such directives are required by Congress when the CIA engages in covert action. In the days after 9/11, President Bush signed a covert action finding authorizing the CIA to kill or capture and detain Al-Qaeda operatives around the world, but the finding was silent on the interrogation tactics to be used on those in detention. Officials say that Tenet never demanded written presidential authorization for the interrogation techniques, and he agreed not to go into the Oval Office and describe in detail in a formal presidential briefing what the CIA was doing with captured Al-Qaeda operatives and other prisoners. It is not clear whether Tenet was told by Cheney or other senior White House officials not to brief Bush, or whether he made this decision on his own. It is also possible that Bush made it clear to Tenet what he wanted done, and that Tenet decided not to ask for written orders. Certainly, Cheney and senior White House officials knew that Bush was purposely not being briefed and that the CIA was not being given written presidential authorization for its tactics. It appears that there was a secret agreement among very senior administration officials to insulate Bush and to give him deniability, even as his vice president and senior lieutenants were meeting to discuss the harsh new interrogation methods. President Bush was following a don't ask, don't tell policy on the treatment of prisoners. When reporters asked the White House whether President Bush had approved of torture or harsh interrogation practices, they were asking the wrong question. The right question was whether George W. Bush had been given plausible deniability by his own inner circle. The failure to demand explicit and written presidential approval for the interrogation practices may come back to haunt the CIA in the future. I think senior CIA officials wanted to be more Catholic than the Pope, so they went ahead and just did it, and did it without explicit presidential authorization, said a CIA source familiar with the CIA Inspector General's investigation of prisoner abuse. There was no explicit presidential approval. The most significant written approval obtained by the CIA for its interrogation practices came from a Justice Department legal opinion authorizing the use of harsh tactics. That classified legal opinion was requested specifically for the case of Abu Zubaydah. The agency wanted to provide some legal protections for officers involved in the Zubaydah interrogations. In fact, a key difference between the instances of prisoner abuse committed by the U.S. military at Abu Ghraib and the harsh tactics used by the CIA is that the CIA's practices at least had some explicit and written high-level authorization. In that opinion, the Justice Department's lawyers determined that the harsh tactics were allowed under the doctrine of self-defense. Self-defense? Interrogating a prisoner is self-defense? Oh, well, that one's confusing. Only government. Abu Zubaydah might have information about future terrorist attacks against the United States, and so the CIA was justified in playing rough in an effort to obtain information that could save American lives. Well, that's any interrogation. CIA officials believed that Justice Department opinion gave them sufficient legal protection for their actions. Still, some agency officials later expressed concern and frustration that Tenet had not demanded and obtained written presidential authorization in order to make clear in the future what they believed to be true, that they were doing what George W. Bush wanted them to do. According to a CIA source, one senior CIA official interviewed by the CIA Inspector General told the IG staff that he regretted the fact that Tenet and other senior agency officials had not gone into the Oval Office and looked the president in the eye and specifically briefed him on their interrogation methods. In order to avoid a requirement for a presidential finding, the CIA determined that the interrogation tactics should be considered a part of the agency's normal intelligence collection, rather than be defined as a covert action. That semantic difference allowed the CIA to conduct the interrogations without specific presidential approval. This was not considered a covert action, and so there was no finding, no MON, a CIA acronym for Memorandum of Notification, the procedure by which covert action findings are amended to provide approval for specific operations. This from a CIA source. It was considered part of intelligence collection. In many ways, the Abu Zubaydah case was the critical precedent for the future handling of prisoners both in the global war on terrorism and in the war in Iraq. The harsh interrogation methods the CIA used on Zubaydah prompted the first wide-ranging legal and policy review establishing the procedures to be followed in the detention of future detainees. Abu Zubaydah's capture triggered everything, explained a CIA source. In the process, the CIA became the principal interrogators of high-value detainees and the first U.S. agency to develop controversial interrogation techniques. The Bush administration's authorization of those techniques for first use by the CIA on Abu Zubaydah created a permissive climate that eventually permeated the entire government and transformed American attitudes towards the handling of prisoners. Once the CIA, which had no history of running prisons or of handling large numbers of prisoners, was given the green light to use harsh methods, the United States military, which had a proud tradition of adhering to the Geneva Conventions, at least officially, began to get signals from the Bush administrations that the rules had changed. Prior to Zubaydah's arrest, the United States had mostly captured low-level fighters off the battlefields of Afghanistan, and only a few had significant intelligence value. At first, the United States and its Afghan allies held Taliban and foreign Arab fighters, defined by the Bush administration as enemy combatants rather than prisoners of war, in medieval conditions in overcrowded Afghan prisons. It quickly became obvious that a long-term solution was needed both to deal with the rising number of prisoners and in order to interrogate them in isolation. In response, in January 2002, after considering several alternative sites, the U.S. military established a prison camp at the U.S. Navy base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and began airlifting prisoners from Afghanistan. And began airlifting prisoners from Afghanistan into the new prison named Camp X-Ray. The first prisoners arrived on January 11th, 2002. While the U.S. military was flying Afghan grunts to Guantanamo, President Bush chose the CIA over the FBI and the Pentagon to take the lead in handling senior al-Qaeda prisoners. By choosing the CIA over the FBI, Bush was rejecting the law enforcement approach. By choosing the CIA over the FBI, Bush was rejecting the law enforcement approach to fighting terrorism that had been favored during the Clinton era. Bush had decided that al-Qaeda was a national security threat, not a law enforcement problem, and he did not want al-Qaeda operatives brought back to face trial in the United States, where they would come under the strict rules of the American legal system. That meant the FBI, which had taken the lead in criminal investigations of al-Qaeda prior to 9/11, would be pushed to the sidelines. I can't stop. For FBI agents in the fields in Afghanistan, the first sign that they had lost the turf battle for control of al-Qaeda prisoners to the CIA came in late 2001 in the case of Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, who had run an al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan until his November 2001 capture. At first, al-Libi, one of the first al-Qaeda operatives captured in the Afghan war, was questioned by the FBI at Bagram Air Base outside Kabul. When the FBI agents began to coax al-Libi's cooperation, they advised him of his Miranda rights. The FBI agents believed he would be flown back to the United States for prosecution. In those early weeks after 9/11, the FBI was still thinking first about criminal prosecutions of al-Qaeda operatives, not torturing them in secret overseas prisons. The FBI believed that al-Libi could be useful as a witness against Zacharias Moussaoui, the French-Moroccan flight student who had been picked up on immigration charges in Minnesota just before 9/11, and who was the only person in the United States facing prosecution in connection with those attacks. Hanging over this was Moussaoui, recalled an FBI source involved in the al-Libi case. What do we have against Moussaoui? We were thinking that we could get this guy to testify against Moussaoui. The CIA, however, had no interest in allowing al-Libi to set foot in the United States. In the end, CIA officers simply came and took al-Libi away from the FBI in Afghanistan, according to the FBI source. The agency flew him to Egypt, where Egyptian intelligence, an organization known to have tortured prisoners, interrogated him on behalf of the agency. According to the FBI source, as the CIA took the prisoners away, an FBI agent overheard one CIA officer say to al-Libi, "You know where you are going. Before you get there, I'm going to find your mother and fuck her." Oh, that's messed up. By this point, George Tenet and the CIA were rapidly gaining in power and turf. Before long, the CIA would have its own prison system, with the mandate to take charge of top al-Qaeda detainees. The CIA quickly vetoed Camp X-Ray at Guantanamo as a place to hold important prisoners. It bit my lip. CIA officers reported back to Langley from Guantanamo that there were too many American officials from too many different agencies, all conducting interrogations and all trying to get in on a piece of the action, and all trying to prove that they could be the first to obtain a nugget of intelligence from the sorry lot of Afghans and Arabs being held there. Long before there were concerns within the CIA or elsewhere in the government about prisoner abuse at Guantanamo, there was a widely shared view within the CIA that Camp X-Ray had turned chaotic. A goat fuck. Worse, it was too public. The CIA wanted secret locations where it could have complete control over the interrogations and debriefings, free from the prying eyes of the international media, free from monitoring by human rights groups, and most important, far from the jurisdiction of the American legal system. The CIA assigned a group of agency officials to try to find alternative prison sites in countries scattered around the world. They were studying, said one CIA source, how to make people disappear. There were a number of third world countries with dubious human rights records willing to play host. One African country offered the CIA the use of an island in the middle of a large lake, according to CIA sources, and other nations were equally accommodating. Eventually, several CIA prisons were secretly established, including at least two major ones, codenamed Bright Light and Salt Pit. A small group of officials within the CIA's Counter-Terrorist Center was put in charge of supporting the prisons and managing the interrogations. CIA sources say that Salt Pit is in Afghanistan and is used to house low-level prisoners. Bright Light is one of the prisons where top Al-Qaeda leaders, including Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the central planner of the September 11th attacks, have been held. Bright Light's location is secret, and it has been used for only a handful of the most important Al-Qaeda detainees. CIA sources say that the agency has repeatedly moved the most important detainees from one hidden prison to another in order to keep their locations secret. In addition to Thailand, the CIA has established secret prisons in Eastern Europe, reportedly in Poland and Romania. But the CIA is believed to have secret prisons in other locations around the world as well. Eventually, the CIA set up one of its secret prisons in Guantanamo, separate from the main Camp X-Ray, but closed it down after U.S. court rulings began to cast doubt on whether prisoners held in Guantanamo would come under the protection of United States law. Later, the U.S. military built new, more permanent prison facilities at Guantanamo to replace Camp X-Ray. The exact locations and nature of the CIA prisons housing high-value Al-Qaeda detainees are still among the most closely guarded secrets in the government. Within the CIA's Counter-Terrorist Center, the locations of the prisons for high-value detainees are so secret that analysts are not allowed to send questions to be asked of the prisoners directly to the prisons. Instead, according to one former CTC official, CTC analysts must turn over their questions to the small group within CTC managing the prisons. That group then sends the questions to interrogators. Period. That was the way they tried to make sure you never knew anything about the prisons, said one CTC veteran. CIA officers soon learned one thing for sure. Prisoners sent to Bright Light and the other facilities handling high-value detainees were probably never going to be released. The word is that once you get sent to Bright Light, you never come back, said the CTC veteran. To be sure, the Bush administration has not yet decided what to do with top Al-Qaeda operatives after they have been drained of all intelligence value. Several senior CIA officials have expressed eagerness to get out of the prison business, but they are not yet sure how they can extricate themselves from it. Meanwhile, as the CIA's network of prisons grew, many CIA officers began to shudder at what was happening to their agency. A poisonous new culture was taking root. The CIA was building a dark infrastructure that no one wanted to talk about. For many CIA case officers, this was not the job they had signed up for when they enlisted in American espionage. I kept wondering, how did we get into the prison business? Said one source who worked for the in the CTC. Why was the CIA doing this? This wasn't what we had been trained for. And let's finish the episode there, shall we? Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can hit that like and subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Blah, 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 blah. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me.